Having a bulletproof pre-market plan is pivotal for any successful trader. And in today's video, I want to go over my specific pre-market analysis and plan that allows me to be successful for that day, finding my A-plus setups, giving a market sentiment for the day and or week and or month. All right. So welcome to the video, everybody. My name is Dr. B. If you've never been here before, I appreciate the support on the channel. If you are already a subscriber, you already know. If you've made that move into the next level of our Discord, Leverage University, congratulations, and or our mentorship. All right. So without further ado, let's jump into it today. And I want to give you a free gift. So if you would like this pre-market routine and you like the way this analysis is done, right, all you have to do is join this Leverage newsletter here, our Leverage University newsletter. It just allows you to jump into our WAP platform, get access to any updates that we have, discount codes, or any new videos that we put out, right? Just allows you to be more connected outside these YouTube streets, okay? So join there and a link will be available to you for this checklist, all right? So I want to go over each section here and then give you an idea of what it looks like for me doing it in real time. All right. So we got our daily market overview and it allows me to give a market sentiment. Okay. Now for me personally, how long does this actually take? Roughly about 30 to 45 minutes for me personally. Okay. So in the morning, I'm waking up about an hour before the market opens, and then I'm on the charts on here roughly about 45 minutes. Okay. So about 30, 45 minutes is good for me personally. I can do a little bit quicker depending on the type of day. And maybe the week has been playing out and I have a better feel for how the market's going that week. All right. So this section here gives me a sentiment. So am I bullish? Am I bearish? Am I on caution? Is there news data? Are there earnings, right? Can I put more risk on? Do I need to take risk off because it's a little uncertain? So this gives me a sentiment and we'll go through each. Then I build my watch list, what I want to trade for that day. So if it's SPY, QQQ, IWM, NVIDIA, right, whatever ticker that I'm looking at, I want to kind of get a list of, what kind of trade I want to take on there. Do I want to take a more bullish trade on that particular ticker? Do I want to take a bearish / put trade on that particular ticker, right? And then are there any reasons they're on watch? So they have earnings or a news catalyst or high volume or a clean technical setup, right? Anything like that that gives it kind of that boost. So if it's negative energy maybe around NVIDIA right now, then maybe there's more put setups. If there's positive energy and it's been in the news, maybe like Google has, and it just continues higher, right? Cool, right? So that's what I get from that second section there. Now I go into the charts. After I've done those things, I go into the charts and I get my levels marked out. Then I identify what type of setup I want to take. Okay. Now, if you haven't watched my A-plus setups video, I do have that on the channel. If you have not watched my charting video, I have that on the channel, and so many more. This risk management, I have that on the channel. Okay. So you can go back on some of these and see what this stuff means. So I don't have to explain it here on this one. All right. So A-plus setup are things that work majority of the time because you've tested it multiple times. So it is a plan, it is an idea, it is a setup, okay? So if I see a gap fill, which that video is doing very, very well on the channel, then that's a very high probability setup for me, right? Whether it be puts through the gap or calls back upside to fill a gap. Break and retest of previous day highs or previous day lows for puts, okay? So those are all setups that I'll look and see what type I like on what specific ticker or indice that I'm looking at. Then the final kind of 15 minutes of the market is when I get my mind right. I'll follow my rules of no FOMO, no chasing, slow your breathing, take your time, be patient, let the trade come to you. Right, I'll turn on my vibes. I've got instrumental vibes that I like to play. So if you need those, just type in YouTube, or if you have it on your Spotify playlist, I like to look at or listen to lo-fi jazz or lo-fi hip hop or anything that does not have any type of words. I just like to have that in the background. And then my lighting also, matters to me. My environment, I'll have my water set up so I get everything as clean as possible. So when I jump in, I'm not frantic, right? Kind of have a clear mind, right, of what my game plan is for that particular day. Okay. And then when the day finishes, I'll journal on the specific trades and reminders or anything that I need to pay attention to. Like, hey, there's data, pay attention, wait, whatever. Okay. So let's jump into what we have for the actual day to day. Okay, so now I'll jump into what it looks like for me. So the first thing I'll do is I'll jump onto the economic calendar. Okay, that gives me an idea of the data for the week. And to make it simple and plain, you want to look for 8:30 data. Okay, that typically gives a sentiment for that particular week. I apologize, it's right here. Okay, so we're coming into a whole new month, a new week, and also a new day if I'm trading on Monday. Okay, so this is a little bit more broad overview. So I work my way top down to get a bigger analysis. What type of sentiment is December typically? It's typically more bullish in nature from experiencing years past. The first of the month sometimes can be a little bit tricky because it's trying to settle in. Maybe there's profit taking from the previous month. In this case, we're coming back off a holiday weekend, right? So maybe I want to be a little bit more patient coming into the start of a whole new month, a new week, okay, to see how things are playing out. Are we pulling back for that month to start off? Kind of like many people got very bullish going into November, and then November actually became a little bit more bearish, right? So that's the sentiment, okay? So 8:30 data and 10 a.m. data. I'll just mention that for the simplistic sake. If you see 8:30 data and if you see 10 a.m. data, you want to pay very close attention to that because that gives a sentiment for that particular day. So 10 a.m. data allows the market to kind of react and there's more volume that starts to pick up. Have you ever been in a trade, maybe the first thing on market open and then you didn't know there was data, right? Or what that data even meant. And then your trade goes in the opposite direction. You're like, what in the world just happened? You've got to be understanding if you're going to do this seriously about what's going on overall, okay? Not just on the charts, not just saying I like Tesla, so I want to trade Tesla calls. You need to know what's going on the fundamentals if you're going to trade more specifically options and also futures market as well, okay? So that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do is I jump into CNBC, and there's a little trick here, a little shortcut, and type in pre-market movers, okay? Pre-market movers. And what that does is it pulls up a list of everything that is maybe news driven or sentiment driven. So you can see here that it has a title that will be every morning stocks making the biggest moves pre-market. Okay. And what that does is allows me to click in and see if there's anything that I normally trade, which are primarily big tech stocks. I do trade some of the financial things such as Hood and SoFi and so on and so forth. But primarily, if I see any big things on the charts that are dealing with tech, AI, right, that are market movers, I might put those at the top of my watch list. So in this case, you see Palantir. This was back on November 10th, right? So this is an old one. But Palantir popped 3% and it tumbled more than 11% based off of negative sentiment. So maybe there's a little bit more bearish pressure on Palantir that morning. You can see that MP Materials, right, very hot sector in the rare earths, rose 3% after it got an upgrade, right? So more of a positive sentiment. So maybe I'll look for MP calls, right? A lot of these other things, down further, if I don't recognize the name or I don't trade it often, I'll just kind of take a look. Cool. Medterra, maybe the healthcare sector might move because of this. Who knows? But I'm pretty much paying attention to anything that I'm like, ooh, Google, ooh, Palantir, ooh, NVIDIA, AMD, so on and so forth, right? So that's what I'll do for my first two things. The next thing is jumping on the charts, okay? Jumping on the charts. Now, one thing that I want to mention really quick, I apologize, is the earnings for that week. If I'd have any earnings, right, I like to just go to Earnings Whispers. If you don't have Twitter, you can just type it into Google. But Earnings Whispers, it allows you to see the earnings that are coming up for that particular week. So I want to know this just in case there's big market movers. So I know Snowflake and CRM are big market movers. So I may want to put those at the top of my watch this week. Marvel as well, may want to put that at the top of the watch. Maybe some of the semiconductors can move, some of the tech stocks can move based off of some of these, CRM, AI, tech, that kind of situation. And then also we have some interesting retailers that move as well. Kroger moves pretty nice, Dollar General, DocuSign. Right, so I'll check this to see if anything that I normally trade or any big tech or anything is on this watch list, okay? That gives me an idea for the overall week, okay? So once that's done, I've done three things, right? I've done three things. So you're seeing it in real time. I've done economic calendar, got the sentiment. I've done CNBC to give me pre-market movers, and I've done my earnings for the week. Okay, now it's time to jump on my favorite part, which are the charts. So I have a general sentiment, and now I want to mark out my levels. So what I'll do to make this video more applicable to people for day trading is I'll jump into the lower time frames. But in this case, this kind of analysis, because I'm recording on a Saturday and it's a new month, a new week, and it'll also be a new fresh day, right? You've got to look from some of these higher time frames. So a monthly, right? Look at that November monthly candle. It used to be a big solid red candle, and now this is a big wick at the bottom. So that got bought back up at the end of the month. Okay. So that's bullish, right? So I want to come into this month a little bit more bullish in nature simply because of how that last month finished, right? And it's back above the previous month of 682. Okay. So I'm like, okay, as long as we're above 682, then that's the month of, October that we closed, then okay, maybe it stays bullish and it goes higher. Okay. Now I want to jump into the weekly and see how strong this last week's candles was. Okay. I'll mark the candle low of the last week, and I'll mark the candle high of the last week. Okay. Which is right here and right there. Okay. So there's the range that we could potentially trade in if it just chops and goes and back and forth. Okay. You can see what happened here. It went up, then it went back down, then it went back up. Then it broke the range and it came back within the range and we're back up. So pretty wide range, which creates a lot of volatility and potential money-making opportunities. But you also have to be careful because of how wide the range is. This is 662 to pretty much 682, a $20 move on SPY in 1 week with no pullback, right? So I'm expecting maybe this week to be more of a pullback week slightly. Okay, and we'll get those levels going into daily. So now I'll jump into my daily and I'll start marking the daily high, daily low, and now it's coming into what type of trade I want to take for that particular next day. All right, so there's the daily high, it's pretty much the daily, the weekly, and then I'll mark the daily low. All right, so this is previous day low, previous day high. So if you're following the checklist here, all right, now I'm at this stage. All right, key levels to mark. Previous day high, previous day low. And where am I? On SPY. So you always want to start with charting out SPY, QQQ, and even in my opinion, IWM. Okay, the small caps. Okay, previous day high, previous day low. There's your range for right now. So the easiest, or quote unquote, the easiest trade to take would be break of this structure. So break back underneath previous day low, back underneath 680. We can take it down, or break above previous day high, and then we could take it up. Okay, so that's a simple break and a retest trade of the previous day range. Okay, now let's jump into my hourly, and this is where I turn on my after hours. Okay, and you can see the light gray area is the after hours session, and then the dark black area is when we will be trading. Okay, so now that I have my previous day high marked, which is 680 right here, and the previous day marked low, now I want to get my pre-market levels. Okay, so just say that this is the pre-market high. Okay, and just say that this is going to be the pre-market low. Okay, maybe I'll drag it down just a little bit right there. All right, so it's in this interesting range right here that if it holds underneath pre-market low and breaks back underneath previous day high, then I could target pre-market low, and it breaks underneath pre-market low is probably coming all the way back down to the previous day low. Okay, so we've got what? Pre-market high. We've got previous day high. And then we've got pre-market low. And we've got previous day low. All right. So there is how you would come into the day. You would have this marked. So when the day comes, you know exactly what type of trade that you may want to take. If it's just break above previous range high above this yellow line, then break and retest holds for first 15 to 30 minutes, I can take it up a little bit. Okay. If it stays within this range, I don't necessarily want to take a trade just yet. Right. I may want to wait until it breaks range. If it breaks pre-market low, there's a lot of room down here. Right. So I probably would maybe like that trade a little bit better simply because there's a little bit more room and it kind of gets up into resistances once we zoom out. So what you might have to do, because you're like, well, where's it going if it breaks up there? You've got to know where your targets are if you're going to take a trade. Where are you trying to take it to? So if it's a break of a new high, I may have to zoom out back to a 4-hour and maybe even a daily and say, where's the next resistance level? If I take a breakout trade, okay, cool. Right there. All right. There's some resistance. Last time I got it 684, underneath 685, it rejected. So I got to be careful that we're pushing right up in to a previous daily high or a weekly high in this case. Okay. So I want to mark that because when I jump back into my hourly, look how close that is. Right. So if we just trend higher into that big key resistance and it rejects, then I may want to be careful about that. Right. But I had to zoom out a little bit. Okay. So this is what it looks like. Once I jump on the charts, I had this simply done. All right. Now, what I'll check next are gaps, right? I want to check and see, and I'll have to turn off my after hours again, after extended hours. And I want to see if there's any gaps. All right. I have to zoom out a little bit, zoom out a little bit. And for, again, if you've watched my gap fill video, all right, I see a little bit of a gap right here. So that could be an opportunity. Right? If it's overextended, I'll check my RSI as well, right? So I have a video on that as well. So this is where all these tools come in. I'm like, ooh, this RSI is a little bit overextended on an hourly. This MACD potentially could cross. That could potentially bring a pullback, and I can maybe target this gap fill if I want to trade against it, right? Because we've made a pretty big move off of these lows with no pullback. All right. Well, Brian, what does a pullback look like? I can just show you simplistically that a stock is not supposed to go up in a straight line like this. As a grind, low volume grind, right? You want stocks to look like this. Rotate, down, rotate, jump back up, rotate. It's not supposed to look like a straight line. See this right here? Straight line. And that just comes from experience of knowing, what a stock is supposed to look like. So we could have a deep pullback at some point. So Wall Street comes back from the holiday weekend. We get to a target. They're like, oh, we're all back up here. I don't want that. Let's pull it all the way back down, right? Potentially trap everyone that's shorting it and then rotate it right back up, right? So that is a trade that I might be looking for, right? Is more of a potential rejection because we are up in resistance, right? Or if I want to take a breakout trade, it needs to clearly break these resistances because this is a pretty heavy level, right? So just because we're bullish going up, look where we're bullish into, right? Into heavy weekly and daily resistance. This whole zone, last time people tried to trade up into here, it got pulled back and rejected. So you have to be mindful of that. Not just that we're bullish, we're going back to all-time highs, but we might pull back before we go to all-time highs, right? Or you have to wait till it cleanly breaks above 686 in this case, okay? So that's just my sentiment going into this week is that it looks like we're going back to all-time highs, but we might pull back before we go to all-time highs, okay? So that's my general gist of what the intraday looks like of what type of trade. Right? Is that, okay, I zoomed out, SPY's getting a little bit overextended. I don't really want to take any call breakouts into big resistance. I need to have either pullback, a previous day low, and then take it back up. So hold 580, calls back up, or I would maybe like to take a break and a retest underneath previous day low and take it back down into that gap fill that we saw back to 675, okay? And what I'll do sometimes, I'll switch back and forth as I'm live trading, but I'll put a gap fill maybe right around here and just know that there's a gap fill down there because you really can't see it as much when you have after hours on. You can see it more like I showed you guys in the gap fill video when the charts are off, right? See that big gap right there? It's not huge, but it's about $1 and some change. But that could be where liquidity is. So it could trap people. We break trend, we pull back to like that, and people are wondering what's going on. It's like, well, did you zoom out? Did you check your gap fills? Did you check your previous day low, previous day highs? So I'm expecting a pullback at some point with SPY over the next week or so, right? Does that mean we stop our bullish trend? No, right? It just means that SPY might need to pull back. QQQ might need to pull back, all right? Then I'll do the same thing on Qs. So I don't want to repeat the process, but again, previous day high, previous day low, all right, pre-market high, pre-market low, okay? And then I'll zoom out a little bit because we're on a bigger time frame, right? I'm going into a new week, a new month. I do need to check on the monthly and the weekly and the daily. But as you go into the week, you'll just be doing typically previous days levels. Does that make sense? Previous day levels. But because it's going into a bigger time frame, I need to have bigger levels that are marked. All right. Now, when I'm coming into a day, right, I'm checking my tech stocks. Okay. This is a whole separate video about what to trade as a beginner, or what tickers do you trade? How do you know what to trade? Is I'm always trading based off SPY, QQQ, IWM, but then I'm looking at relative strength and relative weakness. Okay. That simply means that as SPY is moving up, right, what is moving down? And we know right now, NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is still relatively weak. So if the market gets weak, NVIDIA is probably going to accelerate a little bit more because it has relative weakness to the market. So I know that NVIDIA overall is relatively weak. Does that mean it's not going to recover? No. But if the market pulls back, what's the first thing that's going to start dropping and accelerating? Probably NVIDIA. Okay. And we know also semiconductors have also been a little bit weak as well in general. So maybe the semis as a whole pull back. Okay. Now, AMD has also been fairly weak. It got a nice recovery off of here, but it's also been relatively weak. You can see here these pops down and pops down. It's trying to fill that gap. There's the big rejection. It's got lower highs. So I also know that AMD is relatively weak compared to the market, right? It's still trending lower highs. It hasn't rotated all the way back up to the highs. Now, if we check on a different semiconductor, look at AVGO. Right? AVGO has created new highs with the market. So that's relatively strong, right? So if the market gets strong, then AVGO might continue into new highs, right? So just need to kind of know which stocks are strong and moving with kind of the market, and which stocks are weak and moving with the market, and vice versa. If the market is weak, it's going to be very hard for AVGO to continue higher. Right. So I may want to be careful on a new breakout of AVGO if SPY and QQQ are pulling back. Right. I know Apple has been relatively strong at this time of this recording. So Apple wants to break out of 280 and continue into new all-time high blue sky territory. But if the market is weak, it's going to be very difficult for Apple to get that juice. Right. But if the market is very strong and SPY is breaking out, you see QQQ breaking out, then Apple might be that one relatively to the market to go higher, right? So you can typically look at these by just the daily candles and how much of an uptrend is continuing to break new highs in comparison to NVIDIA that is still rolling over, or AMD that has not created a new high and is still kind of sitting down here, right? Palantir, yeah, it's broken out. So Palantir looks a little bit better off that candle, but it hasn't really rotated back up. So we know that everything in the purple section, which are primarily my semiconductors, is relatively on the weak side. Okay. So if the market gets weak, I may want to trade more on the semiconductors because they're relatively weak. Right. If the market's strong, I know that many of the tech stocks right now are picking up steam again. Right. Apple, Microsoft picking up steam, Meta picking up some steam. Right. Google still very, very strong. Right. It may not want to fill this gap right away. Right. So that is my sentiment. Once I do SPY, QQQ, IWM, mark those levels, I'll go into each individual stock and mark those levels. Previous day high, previous previous day low, pre-market high, pre-market low. All right. And you can trade within that range. So let me show you what it looks like on one of the stocks. Okay. Because I've been killing Google lately in a good way, where Google has been trading very nicely intraday, very nice rotational movements, even though it's sitting up here and it looks choppy. Okay. So what I did on Google coming into this day is I marked what? Previous days. Remember, the black area is when the market's open. So before this trading day opened, I marked this previous day high. I marked the pre-market high. And this was the exact trade, if you watched the last video, that I took and why I took it. Okay. And previous day low. So look at this beautiful trade. Even though it doesn't look like much, this is roughly a $8 to $10 move on Google right here. That is a lot with options. Okay. So if I go into my 15-minute, right, that's where it gets granular. So look at this candle. See how it was a solid, if you don't know, this was a solid green candle going up. Okay. And then it flipped, sold off, and turned red like that. That's how it ended up like that. So once I saw that type of candle, that's a failure of previous day high and pre-market high back underneath in the range. Where is it headed? Probably previous day low, because I marked those levels, right? If I mark the micro levels even more, right? You could technically mark, and this is hard to judge because there's a gap, right? So there was a gap on this stock, which made it even better. So that's why it was an A+ setup for me. So I would mark that more of a pre-market low versus this, okay? Because there's a gap right there. But this is technically your pre-market low. So once it failed underneath, see how aggressive this candle broke through that level? See how it tried to hold this level? So it was in this tight range, it failed the range, and look how aggressive, and where did it go right back to? Previous day low, right? So that's just simply working from top down, and then that is the trade idea. So I can just trade a failure of previous day high, failure of pre-market high, and then take it back to pre-market low, and then previous day low, right? So there's about 3 or 4 trades, plus there was a gap, right? When you zoom out here, look at this. So I'd already checked this pre-market. There was a gap right there. That's a A+, 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 A+ setup for me, right? And the gap kind of gave it away. And all I was looking for was a failure of pre-market high and previous day high. Easy money, right? Right through that gap. So let's jump to the checklist and see if we covered everything. Okay, risk management, cool. That's a different video. You're more than welcome to check that video out here on the channel. And then a mindset and discipline check, in which we covered on. So as I'm going through this, I will check, throughout it, and you can check it on, you can see here, right? You can check it, right? If you don't have Notion, that's cool, right? Follow the instructions to duplicate it and get into Notion, or you can print it out, copy and paste, whatever you want to do. But this will be a shortened version of this, right? So I don't have to go through each one of these every single time, but I kind of can roll through them in my mind. So I'm like, sentiment, okay, bullish, bearish, okay, we're in resistance, okay, cool. Like there's some gaps. I want to look at the gap stocks. If we get weak, I want to focus on those gaps down. If we get strong, okay, are there any gaps up? Okay, cool. Right, so it speeds up the more comfortable that you get with your pre-market routine, right? Because you can have shortened versions of it of what is important. I want to make sure the data, I want to make sure my pre-market high, pre-market low, previous day low, previous day high, and I want to mark if there's any gaps. Those are my focal points coming into the day in any like catalyst news. So I'll check CNBC pre-market movers. All right. Woo, what a video. Y'all know how much it took to get this video out. Okay, there was a lot of interruptions. So hopefully you appreciate it. I appreciate you for listening to this and watching and taking up of your time. Again, check out the link below to either upgrade to our Leverage University. It's a fresh month. This is no better time to start inside of a community, right? But if you want to stay on here, that is perfectly fine. Just click that newsletter link and join that to get the actual pre-market routine. All right. Thank y'all so much. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on those notifications, and I will see you at Stock Sermon Sunday that you do not want to miss on Sundays at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time for the time of this seasonality. Okay, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. Okay, I want to get you in, I want to get you out. All right. Thank y'all so much. Until next time, peace, love, and blessings.